The Frame Awards is all about recognizing spaces and products that matter. Industry professionals representing a 15-person strong jury panel discuss their favorite projects of the month, consisting of a winner and honorable mentions.
Initially, the idea was that we live in these closed environments, like you live in a very comfortable place, but it just doesn't give me anything. Like the temperature's the same all day. The smell just smells maybe at best like new carpet or something. Why are the walls not alive? I think from that it shifted towards like, why do we need the walls at all? And there was this sense of let's start all over. Like let's make a platform. And then I'm just going to add little things for different seasons so I can survive and also be comfortable. And then I started playing with different layers of glass and wood. Always the minimum boundary between you and your environment that is needed. Like it's not about going back to sort of an animal state. You still want to be like a modern human being, but in the same time, do feel constantly all this life around you. Sort of the brief kept developing while I was also developing the project, because so I built this first cabin for my mother. If I look back now, it was really like a prototype, almost like an installation more than a cabin that had lots of practical issues. Because that first cabin got a lot of attention in the media, I found someone that was helping me to develop more prototypes. So in the end, we built 10 different prototypes, and the entrepreneur was helping me to fund these prototypes. We also decided to rent them out. Obviously also a way to fund all these cabins. What is very interesting there is that I learned a lot about the technical side. What kind of things work, what doesn't work, what breaks easily, what is dangerous, how do people feel and use the cabin. And so I have always been making stuff, but never at this scale, like more like small stuff. I also didn't know any 3D programs. So I learned SketchUp and I just started drawing different options. And then I would speak to my mother, like, do you like it? What do you think? But I would also speak to architects. I would speak to the people from the DIY store. I would talk to my uncle who's built a house himself. Like I would just speak to everyone and include all that knowledge. And then after 2 months designing full time, then we decided, okay, this is it. So the design process was quite condensed, I would say, very short. And then when you're building, it was really like a design and make process. So obviously when you're building, the design process wasn't really finished. If you want to make things move, you better make sure that everything is super precise and super level. And so there was a bit of a nightmare also at times, like to just constantly have to do things again and again. In the cabin of my mother, I really tried to make a bed that came from the floor, but it didn't work at all. And then I kept on trying to solve it in more and more complex ways. At some point, I went back to a much easier way. So in the end, we had a winch system where you lower the bed into the floor just by rotating. And then the floor pieces go back on top of it. So you can really open up the whole space. And there's one extra sort of layout when you push out the glass, the cabin actually becomes twice as big. Also coming from that perspective that how do you make a house as small as you can, but still have all these different atmospheres and usage. So a lot of rooms in one room, basically. If you put a bath under the floor, it's the coldest area in the cabin because it's like the lowest point. And it's also wet. It's always wet. It will never dry. So if you put then lids on top, it's going to mold. So we had in this first cabin always the issue that when I open the bath, then I smell a moldy smell, and I don't want to smell that when I go to like a clean space. Like it's all very low-tech solutions, which I enjoy the most. You see here, for example, these little openings on both sides that there's always airflow through the bath, also when you close the lids on top. And then obviously you get another issue because when you start splashing water, so then we made a sort of a small gutter that brings the water back to the back of this area, and there's another drainage. They're not like definitely not big inventions, but all these small little things make it that it actually works. So there's also extra storage in the kitchen. So that's another thing, that there was 0 storage in the first cabin. We have a second bed upstairs, so you can sleep 2 people downstairs and 2 people upstairs. highly durable. So there's stainless steel behind it. We have all these dry connections here. So we put the cabin up in about 4 or 5 days. And then we can also take it apart again in the same amount of time. So we're now working also with Staatsbosbeheer, the forestry company in the Netherlands, where we put these cabins for a limited amount of years in nature. And after that, we take it away again and remove it maybe to another space. So we're really guest in nature. All these smaller pieces, they're all screwed together. You can also, there's no glue there. You can also take them apart. Why I think that's exciting is because you can completely dismantle the cabin. If at one day you would want to recycle, you can separate all elements. That also goes for the foundation. So we use a screw foundation with a self-leveling steel base because you obviously want it to be super straight. This whole foundation you can also put on site. You just use a very simple key to level the base. Should you want to move it after 10 years, you also take out the whole foundation. There's no concrete there. At the moment, we developed an off-grid system just for the Netherlands. In the wintertime, you use your wood stove to heat your tap water. And in the summer, you use your solar cells on the roof to heat your tap water. So that way we deal actually with the lack of sunlight in the winter. And in the winter, you also want to be warm. So you be burning your wood stove anyways, much more than in the summer. But one thing I think was extremely insightful is that how people use the cabin. So they usually stay about 2 or 3 nights. It's almost sort of the same pattern. Like the first day they arrive and then they open the cabin a few times. But then when they go to bed, they close everything. And then the next morning, they maybe open up the wood layer again. The first night, they're still a bit afraid in the environment. They're afraid of nature almost. And then the next night, they feel a bit more comfortable. And then they open up the wood layer and they sleep under the glass. And then the people that stay 3 nights, not all of them, but a lot of them, they actually, the third night, and if the weather allows, they will also open the glass. What I think is a beautiful way of thinking about is that Anna really takes you by the hand and step by step makes you actually feel not the cabin, but that nature is your home again. As I really wanted this cabin to be slidable by hand and still like slide very smoothly and have double glazing, the whole section now, the glass section, weighs 2,500 kilos. So we had to come up with this super smooth and straight rail. In the same time, that rail had to be airtight. So we sort of came up with this wind labyrinth that slides. So this part actually grips into the deck, which made sure that the wind doesn't come through. So we tested this cabin in the software to wind force 10, and the whole thing cannot be lifted anymore. I wanted this cabin really to be for 4 seasons. So that means that we put in double glazing, but also like the outer layer of wood, we made it much thicker and put in a lot more insulation. I wanted to build on wood, but it also had to be super rigid and stable so it doesn't jam anywhere. So that's why we used Accoya and birch ply in the nucleus of the truss. And we also reinforced it on the inside with aluminum strips. We use the principle of what you have in Dutch bikes, the handbrakes, but then the other way around. So when you let go, it's again fixed in place. That also means that if you're not using it, it grips around the rail. And then when there's strong winds, for example, it's not going to move. Which you learn from if you build one cabin for yourself or for a friend, then it's not so critical. You can teach him how to use it safely. If you want it to be used by strangers, then everything's become so much more complex.
What I really appreciate is how it has been engineered, how the files can be sent to be built on site, which is great from a sustainability perspective. And if you look at the trend, all these people building their own housing, which I find great, although it's a symptom of our times where it's extremely difficult economically for people to acquire housing, but it's a big trend. Many of these people don't have the skills in carpentry or construction to be able to do it by themselves. It's a highly engineered piece of architecture that can be at 80% produced and built on site thanks to digital files and the modern tool of production. Unfortunately, most companies who tried to produce these modular pieces of architecture so that they can be flat packed and shipped around and built on site failed. And I think that most of them failed because of the shipping. They probably haven't optimized enough the on-site production.
Aesthetically, it's really inspiring. and the pictures are very well done, and definitely marketing wise, and that this is something that we can talk later about. When you have a good product, this as well how you market it, and I think that is, it's everything done very, very nicely. They have their own logo, and it's a product. It's actually something that can be marked as a product because at the end it's something to be used.
A lot of things, even when you're not good at it, endurance is like, if you just keep going, like either you become good at it, or some people that see you struggle will say, well, I think I see what you're trying to get at, and I think that's very exciting. I also see that you're really bad at it. So let me help you, and let's do it together. And then you slowly build a sort of a whole family of people around you, and that you don't have to be good at many things, I would say.